It's truly a pleasure to have been on the board of Camera for many years, and to finally bring the founder of Camera to speak to us today. I want to tell you something just briefly about what the media does. I was in shul here for Saturday services this past Shabbos. Towards the end of the Kiddush, we prepare a beautiful lunch Kiddush. Some people even come to services, what we call JFK, just for Kiddush. This one very sweet elderly lady, and I'm careful when I say elderly because I'm 75, so it gets to me, came up to me after services during the Kiddush and said, this is a wonderful religious service, thank you. Also thanked for the speaker's program. And she then said, with it being so wonderful, I'm curious, why do you not support Israel? I had that look. Huh? Well, my son-in-law told me that some people in this congregation support that person running for president who hates Jews. And therefore, you must not support Israel. What do you say to that? Where did she get this from? She got it from the media. That's the whole point here. It's from the media, and it's unstoppable what comes out from the mainstream media. And so what do we do about that? Do we just sit back and say, well, I don't listen to MSNBC or CNBC, so it doesn't impact me? It damn well does impact all of us, because there are people, including smart people and smart Jews, walking around thinking that this specific person running for president hates Jews and hates Israel. Anyway, so I want to introduce you to Andrea Levin and her remarkable husband, Kenneth. Andrea is the executive director and president of CAMRA. CAMRA is the Committee for Accuracy in Middle East Reporting and Analysis. It used to be in America. That was the last A in CAMRA, but she's so expanded CAMRA into Europe and around the world that we had to find another word, so we put in analysis instead of American. The organization she's directed and built for only 35 years. A former editor of Public Policy Journal at Harvard, Andrea writes and lectures widely on media coverage of the Arab-Israeli conflict and its impact on public opinion, and little ladies who come up to me after Kiddush. CAMRA is the oldest and largest, and I must say, most successful Middle East media monitor in the world. Pioneered a mix of academic level research and public activism to combat false information about the Jewish state that greatly undermines sympathy for Israel, distorts public policy, and fuels Jew hatred. Case in point, the campuses, university campuses in this country and other countries. CAMRA's partnership of Christians and Jews counters misinformation in Christian media and promotes interfaith efforts to combat Jew hatred. It says anti-Semitism here each time I say Jew hatred. I am putting in Jew hatred instead of anti-Semitism because that's how far we've come. Camera has expanded internationally to monitor the UK media as well as Spanish language, Hebrew, and Arabic media. It also launched its Education Institute in 2021, dramatically expanding its long-standing campus and K-12 work to meet the alarming and widespread challenges of propaganda in the classroom. So it's truly an honor for me to introduce you to Andrea Levin. On your seats are the Eye on the Media. This is the most recent volume of Camera's magazine, and also more on making contributions, especially for the meeting we will have tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, which we invite you to for a more formal fundraising short event. Please welcome with me the incredible Andrea Levin.
I promised that this would be loud enough, okay, Alan? Okay? Thank you, Alan, for the very kind introduction and the invitation to speak here in this incredibly beautiful place. We've never been here before. I appreciate the chance to have a conversation about the urgent times in which we live, some of the challenges we face, and ideas for tackling them. I imagine most in the room sense. Can you hear me in the back? Okay. I thought I'd spend a few minutes giving you a description of Camera's work, elaborating a bit on what Alan said. Then I'll touch on the Wall Street Journal, taking an alarming, shocking turn for the worse. And perhaps in the Q&A, we can talk about in detail what's up in our schools, who's trying to subvert them, and what we can do, and also how we can better fight anti-Semitic bigotry generally. Let me begin by saying, in my 35 years at the helm of Camera, there has never been a more challenging time in terms of the scale and ferocity of biased, dangerous media coverage. Fundamentally, as you probably all know well, what's happening in the coverage is that the barbaric attack of October 7th is barely mentioned in the framing of the ongoing story. And instead of the just war Israel is fighting, has been turned into a supposed genocide against the Palestinians. And if not a full genocide in mainstream media, it's cast as a disproportionate, overzealous, harsh response to the murder of 1,200 innocents. False accusations are mindlessly repeated every hour and minute in global reporting. Camera was founded in the knowledge that lies about Israel disseminated through the media affect the hearts and minds of the public, and misconceptions such as that Israel is wantonly brutal and unwilling to live in peace with Palestinians can do great harm. Tackling the source of errors and distortions, the reporters, editors, producers, and anchors, the institutions that promote them, can remove falsehoods and deter more of the same. That is what we do. We expose, challenge, correct, and educate in a multifaceted and continuous process. Whether we're criticizing hostile false coverage by Christiane Amanpour on CNN, feel free to boo. Yeah. Or Daniel Estrin on NPR, or bias by the New York Times' Raja Abdul Rahim. Always, we're holding journalists to their own standards of accuracy and accountability. We focus on the facts in our criticism, and I should add, we do not take political positions. Our staff, boards, and supporters are politically diverse. We've elicited thousands of corrections over the last several years. Often there are serious errors, and setting the record straight is important, especially in influential media. Sometimes an important error is never again misreported, and smaller outlets follow suit. Most readers and viewers never see the correction, of course, but it's the impact internally on the media outlet that counts. Also, removing errors that otherwise would live forever online is extremely important. Many times over the years, to make our point emphatically, especially if there's been no action as a result of our direct communication with editors, where there's something that really needs serious correction, we've sponsored billboards, ad trucks, and full-page ads publicizing the false reporting. We've produced short videos and held conferences. Just recently, we had a billboard facing the New York Times newsroom with the poster image of Kfir Bibas. You know who he is, the baby, the red-haired baby, kidnapped from Israel with his brother and parents. It reads, quote, "Kidnapped. Hamas's culture of hate caused this. Why does the New York Times downplay anti-Semitic incitement in Palestinian society?" End quote. 100,000 people pass by the intersection every day, and the billboard was there for 2 months. Interestingly, if you go into the Starbucks nearby, you can hear people talking about it, so that's great. And nobody can tear it down. We also own shares in the major media that concern us, and sometimes attend shareholder meetings to address audiences about the flawed product being produced by the company. We also have an active list of 20,000 people who receive our alerts and information on a weekly basis and join in contacting media outlets to deplore error and bias. Our letter writers are incredibly prolific and eloquent, and in that old-fashioned tradition, they publish widely in newspapers. CAMRA is, as Alan said, the oldest and largest Middle East media monitoring organization in the world, with departments focused on the English-speaking media in America and in the UK, Canada, and Australia, as well as Spanish language media in the Hispanic world. We also focus on the influential Israeli Hebrew media, which influences many of the local journalists and spreads a lot of misinformation. And the Arabic divisions of Western media, such as BBC Arabic, France 24 Arabic, and so on. CAMRA has a staff of more than 60, and we're hiring, in case you know of any good candidates. It's no coincidence that we were founded in 1982 during the first Lebanon War, 42 years ago, and an anecdote about that crisis illuminates the enormous importance of the media to shape events and the great need for truthful, responsible media reporting. Ronald Reagan was president at the time. He picked up a copy of the Washington Post one day, and he saw a UPI photograph that had been distributed globally, allegedly of an infant girl with her arms blown off in an Israeli bombing in Beirut. Horrified by the photo, the president angrily called Prime Minister Menachem Begin and said that the symbol of the war was becoming a baby with its arms blown off. He demanded Israel constrain its actions. In fact, however, the photo caption was false. The child was a boy named Eli Masoud, not a girl. Both arms were intact. The baby had a minor fracture and recovered completely. The injury was caused by a PLO bomb on a Christian neighborhood, not by Israel, but the damage was done. And the true facts, when they emerged, came after Israel's image had suffered and its policies had come under fire. The explosion of reckless media coverage of the Lebanon War was the first of its kind in scale since the founding of the State of Israel, and was the trigger for the creation of CAMRA. The direct impact of biased false reporting on policymakers was a powerful lesson. Of course, right now, as we speak, waiting for that horrific news we might hear right now in Israel, as we meet the US administration, along with other Western allies of Israel, are also clearly being influenced by incessant distorted claims that there is, for instance, famine in Gaza. There is no famine in Gaza. Likewise, the completely erroneous, distorted claims of genocide against the Palestinians are affecting policymakers and NGOs, even though this too is utterly false. We can see the impact of lies in the continuous pressure Israel has experienced to halt its efforts to destroy the Hamas war machine. CAMRA has also long been involved in the campuses. Our first campus newsletter was published in 1990, and it is truly amazing to read that old issue and realize elements of the crisis we see today were evident then too. We ran a story in that first edition about a visiting Israeli basketball team at the University of Michigan in Dearborn, well, you might expect, being hounded off the floor with epithets about Zionists. What we see today is an expansion of that bigoted aggression against Jewish students, but it tells you how long it's been germinating. For many years, we have been involved on North American, British, and Israeli campuses, providing students high-level informational materials, funding for programs, speakers, webinars, and close moral support, and an all-expenses-paid trip to Boston in the summer for a training conference. This year's wrapped up just last week. I always do the final session where we talk about how to have fortitude in the fight for Israel and against the enemies of the Jewish state. One of our programs, the CAMRA Fellows, is a competitive fellowship that trains students in how to educate their peers through campus media and other publishing. We teach them how to reach thousands of their peers on campus with facts about Israel. Of course, we also help them intensively during the so-called Israel Apartheid weeks that recur every spring. It's actually Apartheid months at this point, filled with anti-Israel propaganda on many campuses. We created some new roll-up panel displays this spring, challenging the defamatory falsehoods and turning the rhetorical tables on the pro-Palestinian claims. These roll-ups contain tough messages. Not all students can live with them, but we push them. You know, I'm sure that one of the most poisonous themes loudly espoused by anti-Jewish propagandists is that Palestinians, not Jews, are the indigenous people of the land. Perhaps because these claims are so ludicrous, weak, and indefensible, and because there is so much evidence that many Palestinians are actually newcomers to the region, there is great sensitivity on the topic. All the more reason, of course, that the facts should be displayed regularly. So one of our panels displays the images of ancient artifacts with menorahs and Hebrew references to Zion found in Israel since antiquity. Our young are vulnerable and need us at all levels of education. And so 3 years ago, we launched the CAMRA Education Institute to address the insidious biases poisoning all too many of our kindergarten through K-12 grade schools. We have published a first-of-its-kind monograph on a biased anti-Israel curriculum in the Newton, Massachusetts schools about 10 years ago, and so have built on those beginnings. Today, we have 10 staff members in the department, including several truly brilliant educators. Just in the last months, they've provided research to the House Education Committee in Congress about anti-Semitism in schools, briefed governors, superintendents, principals, and are helping parents and teachers in school districts in New York, Massachusetts, California, Virginia, New Jersey, Vermont, Maryland, and more. We are very excited to be rolling out our own curriculum in a few weeks, a project that's been in the works for years. It's called A History of the Jewish People in the Land of Israel. It is a counterpoint to the many egregious propagandistic curricula that we are seeing. We are very hopeful of getting this into the systems. Lastly, regarding our partnership of Christians and Jews, as Alan mentioned, that department is more important than ever. Our director, Dr. Tricia Miller, who is an ordained minister in the Assemblies of God and an evangelical church with a PhD in the Hebrew Bible, recently, for instance, refuted in print an anti-Semitic Palestinian guest featured on Tucker Carlson's hugely popular podcast. I don't know if you're following the Tucker Carlson grift, but it's been very alarming, along with Candace Owens. Munther Isaac, pastor of the Bethlehem Bible College, whom he interviewed, is well known to us. He claims Israel persecutes Christians in Israel, fueling animosity towards the Jewish state. And this is absurd, obviously. The only place safe for Christians in the Middle East, and where their numbers are growing, is Israel. Tricia is also interviewed extensively in global media, working to counter the insidious efforts to turn Christians, including evangelical Christians, against the Jewish state. We're also organizing interfaith action-oriented groups, starting in Florida, where Tricia is based, to speak out against anti-Semitism. So that is Camera in a nutshell. Let me turn to the Wall Street Journal. The publication, as many of you know, has often been an oasis of sanity for anyone who knows anything about Israel, offering sober, reliable information, and that remains true today on the opinion pages, where facts and analysis are a regular service to the reader. The news pages, on the other hand, have descended into nothing less than propaganda on many days, especially in coverage since October 7th. What is happening there is not very different from what goes on in other biased anti-Israel outlets, such as the Washington Post. That's also become unrecognizable. We have a webinar this Thursday. If you're on the camera list, and please join if you'd like to see these things on Thursday about the Washington Post. So it's worth taking a look at the distortion we're seeing in the Wall Street Journal specifically. There are two basic problems. One is the misrepresentation of key historical fact and policy. The other has to do with the daily skewing of events, the partisan framing of breaking stories, and the choice of experts to weigh in on what the reporter is relaying. There's a new editor-in-chief, a British journalist named Emma Tucker, we don't hold you responsible, no, who's interested in more feature stories and more clicks on the journal website. She's from the Times of London and has come over to take the helm at the journal on the news side. She has gutted the standards department, firing a half dozen editors there, as well as many others elsewhere. There used to be as many as 8 editors looking at a story, especially a sensitive story, before it was published, and they're gone. And a roster of new young reporters have been added, some whom are clearly anti-Israel if you look at their social media and their reporting. An indicator of the journal's dramatic departure from fact-based reporting is a step editors have taken in recent months. It has awarded, rhetorically, all of the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, to the Palestinians. It now refers to the West Bank as Palestinian territory or Palestinian land. Probably you realize what this means. But as a quick reminder, under the Oslo Accords, Israel and the PLO signed a declaration of principles that identified certain permanent status issues, such as the contentious border issue, that would be addressed later in the process, after confidence-building measures, which weren't very confidence-building, and preliminary Israeli redeployments from certain territory. There was to be continuing direct negotiations to reach agreement on the whole area. Eventually, 40% of the West Bank designated areas A and B was ceded by Israel to the Palestinian Authority in 1998 and 1999 under the Wye River Agreements, and can be fairly termed Palestinian territory. Palestinians under the PA control all aspects of the civil, judicial, medical, educational infrastructure of the area, everything except overall security. The process of redeploying Israeli military and setting up the Palestinian Authority in those areas was reached after contentious, protracted, highly publicized negotiation, and obviously reported extensively in the media. But no such agreement was ever reached on the larger 60% of the West Bank, Area C, which remains disputed and unallocated to this day. Israeli settlements, of course, are in Area C. After the Camp David and Taba negotiations failed in 2000 and 2001, and the Oslo process collapsed entirely with massive Palestinian terrorism in Israeli streets, buses, and cafes during the Second Intifada, the permanent status discussions never resumed. Nothing has changed. No land has been transferred. No agreements negotiated and signed. To be clear, on a legal, historical, and security basis, Israel has no obligation to set borders that follow the armistice lines of 1949, which is what the journal news writers are presumably espousing. There's no requirement on Israel to cede the entire West Bank. None. Nor was there any contemplation of such action during the Oslo period. Nevertheless, it is now the rhetorical position of one of the world's most influential publications that the Palestinians are legal owners of the West Bank. It's important to note this is a change. When the same error was made 3 years ago, it was promptly corrected at our urging. This error had been made and corrected by many major media, including the New York Times, and just a few weeks ago, the LA Times. Here's what the journal wrote in its own correction of an erroneous photo caption in that first correction. Under the Oslo Accords, sovereignty over the West Bank is disputed pending a final peace agreement. Correct. So it was disputed pending an agreement then, but now editors on the standards and correction desk say bluntly, when I press them, quote, "We accept the use of Palestinian territories to refer generally to the West Bank and Gaza. The change from saying Israel has rights to the territory and there's a question about sovereignty yet to be resolved, and journalistic language needs to be changed, needs to be precise and accurate to saying the land belongs to the the change from saying Israel has rights to the territory and there's a question about sovereignty yet to be resolved, and journalistic language needs to be precise and accurate to saying the land belongs to the Palestinians and Israel is a trespasser. An illegitimate presence on Palestinian land is a major shift." The newly adopted journal language violates historical fact and deceives millions of readers. This is language used routinely by Israel's detractors. When I pressed the editors further to tell me where and on what date and by whom were the documents signed allocating Area C to the Palestinians, the standards desk answered, "The articles are accurate, there aren't any factual errors." This is a disgrace for a serious publication, and we will be very persistent. We're preparing a video now to amplify the issue. And I want to just tell you how a similar issue unfolded previously, which is very edifying in a way. 24 years ago, in the summer of 2000, during the intense Camp David-Taba negotiations between the PA's Yasser Arafat and Israel's Ehud Barak, the New York Times 3 times reported that Israel was required under the terms of UN Security Council Resolution 242 to give up all of the West Bank and Jerusalem to the Palestinians. This was false. 242 does no such thing. And after Cameron's intervention 3 times, and after the paper corrected the same error 3 times, the executive editor, Joseph Lelyveld, sent a memo to his staff, which was leaked, warning them that these repeated errors were giving cheer and sustenance to their critics who already think the Times is opinionated. He warned them to look through the words to the facts. The Times has never repeated that error, and all the many media outlets that follow the lead of the publication have also gotten it right. There have been essentially no issues in the mainstream American media over these nearly 3 decades in claiming Israel is violating the core tenets of Oslo and 242 in this regard. Serious harm could also have been caused by telling readers continuously that Israel had no right to any part of the West Bank and had to hand it over. And that did not happen. That is why we fight to hold the line in critical legal, diplomatic, and policy language. The Wall Street Journal issue is profound in its importance. And as I said, we will be continuing to raise the temperature on this. The backtracking by the Journal on this issue is consistent with the worsening coverage overall in the news pages. Anecdotally, we're receiving an upsurge of complaints and continuously encountering Journal readers who are bewildered at the anti-Israel hostility in the news pages. It's not been uncommon for there to be 5 stories in a full-page layout with large photos, including the requisite small child amidst the ruins of Gaza, and this in a financial paper with not a single story related to finance. So we will be challenging all of this in the days and weeks to come, just as our staff daily and publicly challenge those who similarly distort the facts on CNN, the New York Times, the BBC, Spain's El País, Israel's Haaretz, France's 24, Arabic News, and more. So now let me shift to the very related problems of bias and propaganda in our schools. Not long ago, our Education Institute staff were approached by parents concerned about a history teacher in Massachusetts who was providing misleading maps to students that, here we go again, identified the West Bank and Gaza as Palestine. This particular teacher has undoubtedly been exposed to messages being promoted widely. There is a great push by highly motivated propagandists, that's the only name for them, to inject into our education system a history that demonizes Zionism as a usurper and colonizer. We're working with parents in addressing the matter. It is a complicated challenge when a teacher uses his or her platform to project biased information, and department heads and principals are uninformed or themselves intimidated by the aggressive advance of this ideology. In some cases, redress is swift and straightforward. In other cases, it is protracted. And here's yet another instance of this same theme. You may not remember, but last fall in late September, just a week before October 7th, there was a poisonous gathering at the University of Pennsylvania entitled Palestine Rights, W-R-I-T-E-S, Rights. It was ostensibly to feature poetry, literature, and music about Palestine. The speakers were so extreme that it triggered the first of the big donor-trustee revolts, which was great, and probably set the stage for the firing of Penn's president after her infamous testimony in Congress. Anti-Semite Roger Waters was invited, along with anti-Semites Mark Montiel, Nora Erekat, Huwaida Araf, and scores of others. Among the presenters was also a classroom teacher and activist named Samia Shoman, a California native of Palestinian background. Interestingly, her 2 children are named Jihad and Palestine. She is the coordinator of a curriculum called Teach Palestine that's being promoted across America and includes sophisticated teacher training sessions and support. You can look at the website under Teach Palestine and you will see. You can get an idea what the messages are that Shoman promotes. She has the intersectional ideology that connects Palestinian grievance to that of Native Americans against American colonization, and with Mexicans as victims of American supremacy, if you can follow that. It's very important that we understand we're at a phase in the Palestinian campaign to uproot Israel in which Americans are being targeted aggressively, and we have to confront this. We have to expose it, as Cameron's doing an extensive research and publicity about the efforts. We have to assist families and educators across the country who encounter the propaganda. And finally, at this challenging time for the Jewish community worldwide, I'd like to emphasize that it makes a tremendous, tremendous difference when the public is actively engaged in protesting lies wherever they occur. Please count yourselves warriors in this. Join us, send an email, pick up the phone and call. It's easy. Speak from the heart, make a point or two, sign up for our alerts and training. Thank you very much.
First of all, this will get louder in a minute. This guy is so strong. I'm telling you. I tried to do that and my back went out. Thank you. A little bit more juice on this. First thing I want to say is thank you. You have to understand the depth and breadth of what Camera and what Andrea has accomplished. Also, the staff that works with Camera is remarkable. Each of these experts could by themselves run conferences on what's going on and the lies that have been told and the corrections. So it is our deepest thank you to Andrea, Ken, and to Camera. Now, just a mention, this billboard outside of the New York Times, which some of you have heard me talk about before, it's a killer. It's the whole side of a building. And it hangs down, and it's right in front of all the front windows of the New York Times building. And it usually starts off by saying, "Shame on you, New York Times." So I appreciate your words. You've covered an awful lot, and Camera does an awful lot. You mentioned, interestingly enough, that Camera has an office in Israel. And it's an office that doesn't only handle the media around Israel, but handles it in Israel. And for those of us who are familiar with that, there is sometimes a problem. Judy and I, my wife and I, love going to Israel. We get off the plane and we just, you get choked up. You're home, you're thrilled, you're where your people are. It's wonderful. Of course we're strong Americans and we love America and the American flag, but you get that feeling in Israel. And 2 weeks later, when we're leaving, I am so pissed off because of what the extreme left in Israel is doing to Israel itself. Now, that's just my personal feeling. But can you talk to us a little bit about what's going on in Israel specifically?
It's the reason we actually opened an office in Israel was that we had encountered quotations, citations in many biased anti-Israel articles invoking Haaretz. Do you all know what Haaretz is? It's the newspaper. It's a very small circulation-wise, but prestigious and well-to-do. They're well bankrolled, so they'll last forever. So we started ourselves interacting with Amos Shakin, who's the publisher, and with various correspondents and editors. And we somehow got in in our hands a memo that was sent by Shakin to the whole staff saying, if you get anything from Israel, ignore it. From camera, ignore it. Once you start with them, you never finish. So they stopped communicating. So we decided we absolutely, and because so many American and world, European journalists and others, really, they would say they opened Haaretz every morning. It was the first thing they read, so they could kind of get the lay of the land for their own reporting. So it was incredibly influential beyond its numbers. So we decided we had to open our office there, and that is what we did. So we have now several staff in Israel who have been focused entirely on Haaretz and other Israeli media. But Alan is absolutely right. There is, it's amazing if you think about it. If you think about how robust and incredible Israel's response has been since October 7th and how much unity there is, it's kind of remarkable given the divisive messaging. But it's not just messaging, it's really a faulty reporting, just biased, deeply hostile coverage. I don't know if you all know any of the players there, but so that was the purpose, really, of opening up something in Israel because they weren't listening to us.
How many of you know what as a Jew is? One person. As a Jew, we have an expert on as a Jews here. Ken Levin is the author of the famous book, The Oslo Syndrome, which was published probably 15 years ago, something like that. I would ask Ken to come up and talk about the piece that he just published about as a Jew. What is as a Jew? Okay. As a Jew is the preface to saying, well, as a Jew, I don't agree with what Israel is doing, or as a Jew, and it gives more credence to what follows. So Ken, please come up, take this wonderful microphone and give us a short discussion.
Okay, thank you. Just a brief summary of the article. As a Jew, as Alan was saying, it has become a commonly used phrase. It has been for a long time, but it's been used particularly to refer to anti-Zionist Jews. So as a Jew, we don't agree with there being in a Jewish state, and we see groups such as If Not Now and Jewish Voice for Peace, and a number of individuals, Peter Beinart, you can go down a huge number of them, and who essentially say they side with Hamas. They side with all the accused of Israel that it's a failed experiment, that now it's committing genocide in Gaza, etc., etc. There's also what might be called a second tier as a Jew phenomenon. It's that Israel should exist, but it's failed dramatically in not allowing the emergence of a Palestinian state. And of course, they completely regard the fact that every Palestinian leadership, going back to the beginning, early in the last century, was based on their program was centered on genocidal anti-Semitism. That is, you look at any leadership, Palestinian leadership, their schools, their mosques, if they controlled their media, the central message was, we have to get rid of the Jews, we have to kill the Jews. This is explicitly said by Hamas, that their religious responsibility is to kill all the Jews in the world, and the PA and the PLO, which is the basis of the PA, has always promoted the same message. But somehow these people say it's Israel's fault that there's not a Palestinian state. Now, why do we see in this context so many Israel Jews. Through the history of the diaspora, you've had major Jewish elements of Jewish communities turning against their fellow Jews. And it's been a response to the fact of Jews being chronically under siege, chronically under attack. And there are always elements of the community that want to do anything to engage the other side, to somehow stem the attack. And they may do it by, if stay within the community, by trying to reform the community. Well, let's oblige our enemies by making concessions to them. The Oslo agreements were a central example of that. Or they'll abandon the community. They don't want to be targeted anymore as a Jew. Or they'll actually join with the attackers, as these groups do and these individuals do, as the Jews in today's parlance. Now, anti-Zionist Jews actually predate modern Zionism. So Herzl wrote his book at the end of the 19th century. In fact, anti-Zionism among Jews preceded that by a number of decades. Earlier in the century, the issue of giving civic rights to Jews in Central Europe first emerged. And anti-Semites would give reasons why Jews weren't deserving of civic rights. And one of the reasons widely cited was that Jews were a separate nation. Now, how do you answer this? So some Jews said, no, he's the anti-Semite. No, we're not a separate nation. We were a separate nation at one point, but not any longer. We're a purely religious community now. And they didn't say they were doing this in order to appease anti-Semites. They said, we're doing this because it's the more righteous thing to do. And you had communities in Central Europe that changed the liturgy in the temple and the synagogue to expunge references to Zion and references to longing for Jerusalem. Now, these reformist congregations, when members immigrated to the States, they brought their reformist comprehensions with them. And you see, for example, in the unification, the formalization of the relationship of Reformed congregations at the end of the last century. And for example, there was in 1887, I believe, the Pittsburgh Program. And the Pittsburgh Program says explicitly, we no longer aspire to a return to Zion. And went on and on about that's the past, we're looking to the future. Very anti-Zionist in its agenda. There were events that forced a change among Reformed thinkers over the subsequent decades. You had the recognition by the League of Nations of the Jews' right to a homeland in what is now Israel, more than what is now Israel. And you had, between the wars with these new Eastern European nations that were founded as a result of World War I, many of them very xenophobic, very anti-Semitic, and Jews were suffering. And then from 1933 on with the Nazi government in Germany. And so in the late 1930s, the Reform movement issued a different statement vis-a-vis the Zionist concept. But it was very balanced. It said, yes, we agree that there should be a Jewish community, a larger Jewish community, and it should be a refuge for Jews fleeing some of what's going on in Europe. But it should be a cultural reference, a cultural home in their ancestral land, avoiding the concept of state. Now, this distinction was very important. Why did just as the Jews in early 19th century Central Europe were trying to answer the anti-Semites, Jews at this point were very fearful that the creation of a Jewish state would undermine Jewish rights in other countries, which were still fragile in a lot of countries. Even in the United States, if you look between the wars, World War I and World War II, there's a huge amount of anti-Semitism in the United States. People were talking about how Jews couldn't freely choose what schools they go to, where they live, what profession they wanted to enter. And people were fearful that, well, if you supported, the creation of a Jewish state, enemies, the anti-Semites would say, okay, why don't you go there? Leave here, go there. That's where you belong. And so what this entailed, if you look at the end of the last century, it totally ignored most of the Zionists at that point were from Eastern Europe, Russia. And they were the ones suffering from Tsarist policies that were extremely anti-Semitic. But these Americans or Central Europeans who were anti-Zionist weren't really thinking of those Jews. And the same thing even in the mid-30s. There were members of the very senior members of the Reform movement who were vehemently opposed to a state and were fighting, even siding with the British and keeping Jews from immigrating in the late 30s and 40s, and attacking Ben Gurion and others who wanted a state, totally ignoring the fate of the impending fate, but obvious to many people, fate of Jews in Europe. And that's the days of variation, the same thing. There's 7 million Jews in Israel, half the Jews in the world. But the acid Jew, who sides with the anti-Zionists, who endorses Hamas, endorses right of return for Palestinians, they don't care about that. And unfortunately, this pattern has been and will continue as long as there are attacks on Jews.
Thank you, Ken. Ken's a psychiatrist. You have some comments, or can we open the floor to questions? Let's do that. Let's open the floor to questions, please. Let's take you first. Please try and make it a question.
Alan, thank you, and Andrea, thank you very much, as Alan said, for coming. My question, back to the Wall Street Journal discussion, which is a sad change for them. What could we do, or what can people we know do to affect a positive, more balanced, more accurate change at the Journal?
Well, I do think we're going to do an alert soon on this. I just wrote a whole piece kind of on this topic, but honestly, it's very important to be in touch with Emma Tucker and the World editor, and we will publicize those addresses. They're getting a lot of spontaneous complaint. It's just naturally bubbling up, but we're going to accelerate that the best we can. We'll do all the things that we normally do. It's just this is an unexpected problem.
Is there a chance that she will be replaced?
I don't know. Right now, the one thing I read recently was that she wants more features, more clicks, more lightweight, light fare, and she's got a lot of young woke people she's brought in. But right now, what I had heard was that their digital subscriptions is actually bumped up a bit. So I don't know if it's attributable to this, but they're in pretty healthy shape.
Question.
Thank you so much for your informative talk. So what are the prominent Jewish people in media, like the Wolf Blitzers and the prominent politicians, i.e. the Jewish congressmen and senators and Kamala's husbands, doing to help your cause? Like, why aren't they helping you more? And are you actually in contact with like Netanyahu, because he must be majorly on your bandwagon to help you?
Well, we're straight up we look at the media and we interact with the media. Sometimes we have meetings or sort of input from some of the people that you're mentioning. But in the context of, say, for example, elected officials, it would be in something involving, say, national public radio, tax-supported radio. We have done huge campaigns about NPR. By the way, NPR was terrible. They were the worst thing in American media back in the early 2000s. And we were like obsessed. And they quieted down. They lost millions of dollars in underwriting. And now we let up, and now they're back. So that was a place where we were very involved, and also with PBS. PBS is the television version. We're working with congressmen, letters to Congress, and that sort of thing. So that's mainly where it impinges. We do meet with Israeli officials when we go every February, and Alan and Judy have come with us. So there's that. And as far as, and of course, there are some wonderful members of Congress who we might invite to a gala and that kind of thing. But that's really the extent of our interaction.
Enjoyed your speech, your talk very much.
Thank you.
I'm curious as to why you don't go to. Is this working?
Yeah.
Okay. Curious as to why you don't go and never hear anything about the head of the snakes. The Washington Post, I think, is owned by an individual. I forget his name.
Bezos?
The Wall Street Journal is owned by the Murdoch family. And I have no idea what their convictions are, but I believe that those are two very concerned individuals in terms of their own reputation and where they're going in life. And also they all own other media situations that do or don't. You haven't mentioned any of those. I don't know if you do in your book.
Yeah, I can
And
talk
I'm just
about it.
wondering why you don't go over after that. And then
well,
one quick
yeah.
other thing before I give up the mic, and that is this talk was in part supposedly about the college campuses, and I haven't really heard anything about that.
Yep, happy to talk
Concerned
about that. Sure.
Maybe more than the media.
Okay.
Because that's what
Okay, well, just on the Rupert Murdoch apparently is in an epic battle now, if anyone is following, with his kids. I guess it's Lachlan who is the one in charge. James and Elizabeth and some of his other kids. Anyway, they're trying to, Rupert himself is trying to keep the whole operation in the hands of his heirs, who are of like mind. That's one piece of it. Who knows how that will evolve? But there is, if you read the paper, there is this total schizophrenia between the opinion editorial side, which is fantastic, and I do feel like they must hover on the opinion side, watching what's going to go on, and then they make sure that they have a lead op-ed saying the opposite of what's on the news side. We need to reach the people who are practically speaking producing this stuff, and we will be doing all of that. But Alan, as to the campus, are there other questions?
Yeah. Speaking of the younger generation, what are you doing to impact social media?
Well, we have many different social media accounts. I don't know if you follow all this, but for example, Facebook used to be the big one that we use. So we have 250,000 Facebook followers, but we're kind of shadow banned, and so it doesn't produce what it used to. So I mean, social media is a gigantic mess. We're now more and more on Instagram, so we have a social media account running our new K-12 department. I mean, working with them. We have social media for every one of our departments individually, and our senior analysts all individually and personally are using social media. For example, our Spanish director interacts very closely with Spanish journalists and gets stuff done on Twitter. So that's what we're doing. It's not something you monitor at all the way you can monitor other mainstream media. Even though we try to jump in, we create memes. We are active. We hired a full-time videographer, so we're producing a lot of videos now that we put on Twitter, X, and all the other. I think we're getting started with TikTok, but Mainly it's Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. But Facebook is kind of not moribund, but it's just not what it used to be.
You've really effected some remarkable change, but there's a whole lot more that needs to be done, especially at this time where there are such threats out there to us and to Israel, etc. What can we do here to help Camera be even more efficient and to help Camera have the resources that it needs to continue this? Because there are many organizations that have been formed and who have died along the way. They're no longer with us. Organizations to enhance the PR of the state of Israel. We've seen them come and go. Camera has lasted this long for a reason, because they've been successful. How can we sitting here help that progress?
Well, as I said, it is really, you cannot overstate how important the value of an individual voice is. This is absolutely true. We've seen it our entire existence, that individuals can make a difference when they're active, when join our team and get our material, and every week or so, just follow up and send that note. And then you might get something back and you'll share that with us, and then we'll work with that and things develop. If you're really an outstanding letter writer, we have a sort of SWAT team who meet, and we can send them after something, and they really go to work. So if you're really an interested writer, there are places to do that. And just all of the programs that we're working, I don't know if we're going to get a chance to talk about it, but the whole K-12 revolution, and I was saying to Alan earlier, the revolution has happened. It has swept through our higher education, and it has swept through K-12. I don't know what's happening here in Aspen, but I know in many of the places we're working, most have already had added to their curriculum all kinds of stuff with DEI, and we are, as an organization, do not believe DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, if you're familiar with the acronym, we do not believe that it serves the Jewish community. You cannot work with it. It is against us. So, but it's in the city of Newton, where we live, there was no real DEI until the summer of 2020. It was just kind of in its infancy. The George Floyd, that whole terrible event, and what it just turbocharged all of this ideology, which was lurking there, waiting. So that just accelerated processes that were underway. Now, we are in the counter-revolution. So we and many other individuals and groups, wonderful grassroots efforts have grown up. Parents, actually many Israelis, wherever they settled, they're a lot again in Boston, are active, and grandparents have got to jump into this. You just need to know what's going on in your grandchildren's schools, and we can give you questions and ideas for how you can vet it, so to speak. And there are things that have to be stopped, because the other side is so motivated. They are so motivated. This Samia Shaman, this woman I was describing, with kids of jihad in Palestine, she and her colleagues are working day and night, to get this ideology into our schools. So there are many ways that this is like no other time. It really is like no other time. And so the area of K-12 activity, if you're interested, be in touch with us. We'd be happy to help you to find out what's going wherever, if you because you're based here or elsewhere, to help you?
The grandparent thing is huge. That's us. We can have an impact. Actually, Jewish grandparents are responsible for their grandchildren's education. So what more of a push do you need? Now, just lastly, the mainstream media that we deal with has two problems. One is misleading information. Some people call that untruths or lies. To me, the more important area of the mainstream media is omission, what they leave out. We had lunch a couple of days ago with good friends, very intelligent people, who actually said, I wasn't aware of what the movie showed on Thursday, Sheryl Sandberg's movie. I wasn't aware of the sexual attacks and this. But of course, that's part of the mainstream media omission. And honestly, I feel that's worse than the commission of the erroneous information. This is an absolute incredible organization. I've been proud to be a little teeny part of it, but I really invite you all. Everybody asks, what can we do? What can we do? This is it. This is part of it. Please think about this and help Camera continue to stand up against the monsters like the New York Times, etc. Final thoughts.
Oh, well, thank you, and thank you. He's minimizing